Hello, it's CisVolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. In this video I will show you how to create a glowing shaker card using the adorable Fireflies from the Bloom and Zoom collection by CarlaCreates for VaessenCreative. We will combine a 3D embossing folder, the matching stencil and the coordinating stamps together with glow-in-the-dark embossing powder to give these adorable fireflies a magical effect once the lights go out. Before we start embossing, I will share a simple but very helpful tip. With a permanent marker, I place a small marking dot on both the embossing folder and the stencil, so I can instantly see how they line up perfectly every time. This saves you from guessing and makes the whole process much more relaxing and precise. This project is easier than it looks, and the result is a card that truly shines, both during the day and in the dark, because of the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. I will stamp and color the fireflies, and you will also see how I use the sweet jar stamp with the text "You light up my life" to make the card a shaker card. So get comfortable and enjoy watching! I will start by creating the card panel on which I will stamp the jar. This jar is in one piece, with the text already on it. If you want to stamp this jar without the text, just ink up only the edges or mask the text before stamping. I ink up the stamp with VersaFine Onyx Black ink and make a nice impression on Florence Smooth White watercolor cardstock. Because this will be a shaker card, we need a piece of acetate to make a window. I use Florence acetate sheets, which are also by VaessenCreative. To stamp on a piece of acetate, you need an ink that is suitable for plastic. I use Tweezers because it dries very fast. I guess you can also use archival ink, but that will take much longer to dry. I was not very happy with the first print, so I made another one. I cut this one out and set it aside, because I will now stamp and color the fireflies. Stamping everything you need right away is very helpful, and it also makes it easier later to decide how you want to arrange the elements on the card. Using VersaFine Onyx Black ink and clear embossing powder from CisVolk, I stamp and heat emboss the lid of the jar first, followed by the 3 fireflies. I apply the embossing powder twice to cover as much of the ink as possible. The remaining powder can go back into the jar. For this I use a double folded piece of vellum, which is nice and sturdy and it pours very easily. Before I start heat embossing, I always gently blow over the powder so I can remove any unwanted grains. After use, I clean each stamp with a microfiber cloth and a little water, and then place the stamp back on the stamp sheet. Cleaning is not always necessary if you only use the same ink, but when you use different inks, it is definitely recommended, otherwise you will contaminate your ink pads. If you stamp very often with the same stamp, it is also wise to clean it regularly, because ink can build up and that can result in much thicker stamped lines than originally intended. After coloring them, I will adhere the fireflies with an action wobbler made with this cutting die by CarlaCreates. This magnetic work mat has 2 sides and it is magnetic on both sides. The white side is perfect for inking, stamping, measuring, drawing or anything else where you need a smooth and slick surface. and the grey side is a self-mending cutting mat. This piece of paper will become the card panel. I cut out the inside of the jar, so the jar becomes transparent. And later I can attach the piece of acetate with the stamped text behind it. With masking tape, I tape off the bottom part of the card. This creates a solid ground for the jar to stand on. By using the grid lines on the cutting mat, I can see when the tape is perfectly horizontal. Of course, the card itself needs to be placed straight on the grid pattern. I turn the mat over and now use the smooth white side, because that side will be easier to clean afterwards. We place the stencil in such a way that on both sides half of a firefly extends beyond the paper. That looks better. Secure the stencil firmly with magnets or attach it with adhesive spray or tape. To apply the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder later, I first need to apply VaessenCreative ink through the openings of the stencil. You can do this by dabbing the ink pad directly onto the stencil, but you can also use the re-inker. With a brush that I only use for VaessenCreative ink, I pick up some ink and apply it to the paper. You can also use the foam tool. I noticed that it works better to use dabbing motions rather than circular motions, because the VaessenCreative ink is less likely to go underneath the stencil. You only need a very small amount of ink, and I actually applied too much ink to my brush. Some of the ink went underneath the stencil, but that is not a problem, because after the 3D embossing you will hardly notice it. Later I will use glow-in-the-dark embossing powder from Ranger. Align the panel with the pattern of the fireflies. Remember to keep the marking dot on the same side as you did with the stencil. I don't want embossing on the entire card front. I want it to stop where the masking tape begins, so that the embossing emphasizes the difference between the background and the base of the pot. When I place the cutting plate on the embossing folder with the edge aligned along the masking tape, the embossing will stop at that point. The pressure of the embossing is only applied to the area where the place is positioned. The fireflies that I heat embossed with glow-in-the-dark powder are now pressed inward by the 3D embossing folder. It is also possible to have the glow-in-the-dark powder on the raised areas. To achieve that effect, you need to place the stencil upside down, and automatically the embossing folder will also be positioned upside down. I removed the masking tape to show you what the result looks like, but in principle the tape can stay in place. I'm going to apply Distress Oxide in the color Peacock Feathers to the card panel. And for this I use the large blending brush. First I apply some ink onto my work mat, to prevent putting a heavy blob of ink directly onto the paper. I try to keep the layer of ink fairly light. Along the edges of the paper, I intentionally keep it very light, and around the edges of the jar, I make it slightly darker. It is not a problem that I go over the opening of the jar, because later the lid will cover that area anyway. Of course, ink also gets onto the glow-in-the-dark embossing, but that is not a problem, because you can easily wipe ink off the fireflies with a cloth. The glow-in-the-dark surface is smooth, so it is very easy to clean. With a microfiber cloth and a little water, I can easily clean my work mat, and with the same cloth, I now gently wipe all the fireflies clean. I go over them one by one and occasionally use a clean section of the cloth. You can see that the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder becomes visible again. Before we continue with this panel, we need to add a sentiment to the white part of the card. The text will be "Just keep on glowing." And I do this as follows. I place the card within the grid lines on my work mat. Then I position the stamp within the grid lines as well, but below it and centered on the card. Next I pick up the stamp with a clear block, making sure that the lines on the clear block align with the lines on the work mat. The stamps that CarlaCreates designs are always very sticky and high quality, so they adhere perfectly to the block. With VaessenCreative black ink I stamp the image, and before placing it onto the paper I check the lines carefully to make sure everything is straight and parallel. As you are used to from me, I always emboss my sentiments. I simply like the look much better, and I find that VaessenCreative gives the sharpest impressions. Now we can attach the shaker window. For this I use double-sided tape. This prevents any smudges on the plastic, because liquid glue can sometimes seep out. And with double-sided tape, you know it will adhere properly. The background inside the jar, the part you see when you look through the acetate, I want to make glow in the dark. For this I cut a piece of paper that is about 1 cm larger than the jar, so I can attach it behind the panel later. It can of course be larger, but that extra part will not be visible. I cover this piece of paper with VaessenCreative ink. My ink pad is very old and well used, so it has completely discolored, but it still inks perfectly. You can press the paper onto the ink pad or press the ink pad onto the paper. The goal is to cover the entire piece of paper with VaessenCreative ink. You can also use a foam tool or a brush dipped into the ink. Dabbing works best because that gives you a thicker layer of ink, so the embossing powder will adhere properly. Let the embossing cool down completely before touching it, otherwise you will leave fingerprints. So use tweezers while heating and do not touch the melted powder. I will turn off the lights for a moment so you can see the glow-in-the-dark effect. My camera does not capture it very well, but in real life it is a very beautiful effect. It also stays visible in the dark for quite a long time. Now let's color the fireflies. I use the colors Peacock Feathers, Crackling Campfire and Fossilized Amber. Normally, you would mostly use Distress Oxide ink for backgrounds and Distress ink for coloring, because the colors are more vibrant. But for the Bloom and Zoom collection, I wanted to use these 3 colors for most of the cards I made. And because I don't have all colors in both regular ink and oxides, I stayed with this color choice and used the oxides for coloring as well. I use a Tombow water brush, the medium one. It is filled with water, and I also keep a jar of water nearby to rinse it between colors. When the brush is too wet, I dab it dry on a piece of kitchen paper. I take advantage of the fact that distressed oxide creates a different tone when it reacts with water, and also of the fact that distressed oxide ink is opaque. If you make small mistakes, you can quickly remove them by wiping with water and dabbing dry with a piece of kitchen paper or tissue. I hope my examples and tips are helpful for you. After coloring, we will continue assembling the card. And we will add 2 action wobblers. Enjoy watching me color! action wobbler die to create two small action wobblers. They are cut from acetate sheet, mica plastic. I turn my cutting plate over again, because I want to make a small slit in my card panel, so I can attach the wobbler invisibly in the right place. I want the top two fireflies to wobble. First, I loosely place the wobbler and the firefly on the panel to see if everything fits. And then I measure where I want to make the cut. You will slide the wobbler through the card panel and then turn it 2 or 3 times. So keep that in mind while cutting. The cut does not need to be wider than 4 mm. Before placing the wobbler, I always stretch it out slightly, because that makes it wobble better later. If you attach it flat without stretching, it will hardly move. You can also die cut the wobbler from slightly thicker smooth cardstock. That works very well too, but then it will be visible. Insert the wobbler through the slit and twist it around about 3 times. 4 times is also possible, but then the wobbler will be a bit less high. Before securing it on the back, check if it sits in the right position and if the image fits nicely on top. To secure it on the back, I simply use regular tape. You will not see it later anyway. I repeat the same steps for the other wobbler. With this one, I notice that it is positioned exactly where I have acetate on the back, so I need to make my slit slightly deeper. And it is a bit more difficult to push the wobbler through, but it will still work perfectly fine. If you'd like to try the action wobbler yourself, the item number is CAR0001 Action. You can find the affiliate link in the description box below. If you decide to purchase through that link, I receive a small commission, while you don't pay anything extra at all. And honestly, the price is often even better than in many other shops. So if it's already on your wish list, this might be a good moment to grab it. Thank you so much for supporting my channel, it truly means a lot. I attach the action wobblers to the images with a glue dot. You can also use a foam square, but a glue dot adheres much stronger, so I highly recommend it. You can still bend the acetate wobblers if your images are not raised enough or are slightly skewed. Just bend the plastic as desired. The lid and the third firefly are attached with foam squares. The foam squares add extra dimension. I could not attach the third firefly with a wobbler, because then I would have to have cut through the shaker. I use a roll of 3 mm thick foam tape. You can easily bend this around the corner. It is important to let the beginning and the end meet perfectly, so no shaker material can escape. Because the edge of the foam tape can be quite sticky, I quickly run an embossing powder tool along the sides. The powder removes the stickiness. Only after that I remove the protective backing, and then I fill the opening with shaker material. I prefer to work in this order because from experience I know that if I add the shaker material first and then remove the protective backing, I tend to lift the acetate slightly, which causes the shaker pieces to fall out and stick to the tape, which is something you definitely don't want. Finally, I attach the glow-in-the-dark background with the correct side facing the shaker onto the foam tape. Press it down firmly. And now the shaker is finished. The back is of course not very pretty, so we adhere it to a folded card base. You can do this in 2 ways. You can add foam tape along the edges with the same height as the shaker, so the entire front becomes evenly raised, but this time I chose to add thin double-sided tape along all edges. When I adhere the panel to the card base, the center is raised because of the shaker and the edges remain flat, which gives a very nice clean side view. I do add some 2 mm foam squares between the shaker and the edges, so the transition is not too big and the surface stays smooth without dents or bumps. Start adhering at the fold line. As long as that side is aligned properly, it does not matter if you slightly overhang on the other edge, because you can easily trim that off. There will almost always be a small overhang because due to the dimension, the front panel becomes slightly shorter than the back. Using scissors with long blades, you can trim it off easily. It is quite difficult to capture the glow in the dark effect on camera because the camera adjusts to the darkness, but I will try to show it to you. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and that I was able to inspire you to create a beautiful card with the lovely products from VaessenCreative. The adorable characters designed by CarlaCreates always make me very happy, and I hope they bring you just as much joy. Please leave a nice comment below this video and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest and Instagram. Also follow the fun Facebook group of CarlaCreates. All links can be found in the description below this video, including links and information about the products I used. Enjoy card making, and I will see you next Monday. Bye bye!